Hi, this is Dyanne Klinko, and I'm talking with a very special guest today. I am talking with the one and only Michelle Moog-Koussa. Michelle, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here with you, Diane.
I am so happy to have you here, and I know a lot of my members are going to be very excited here today to see you and to listen to what you have to say about your dad and about the Moog Foundation. Very excited. So let's get right into it. I would like to know right off the bat, how did your dad and the Moog get involved with the music industry itself?
Well, that's a great question because when Dad first worked with a gentleman named Herb Deutsch in 1963 and 64, their intention was not really to get involved with the music industry. They thought that they might just make something for experimental composers, and that feeling lasted for a year or two as they branched out into academia. Um, avant-garde composers within academia. But by the time 1967 rolled around, there were more musicians who were interested, and Wendy Carlos eventually got her hands on a Moog modular, and very soon after that, the Doors, the Monkees,
Oh, no kidding. The
the
monkeys.
the Birds, they all became early users because they were introduced to the Moog modular synthesizer at the Monterey Pop Festival in the summer of 1967. So that was really the foray into pop music. And that eventually led to the Beatles using it as well. And then I believe it was in 1969 or 1970 that a certain Keith Emerson walked into a record store and heard Wendy Carlos's Switched on Bach being playing and said, "What is that?"
And history begins.
Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, history begins.
Wow, and what a history it was, wasn't it? And
Yes.
you know, the relationship that your father had with Keith was a very special one, from what I understand.
It was. They were lifelong friends and they really, really enjoyed each other. I mean, I think they both had that same kind of like dry but bawdy sense of humor. They has certainly had a huge mutual respect and admiration for each other.
Mhm.
Um, my father would always say that he was, when asked if he was a tool maker, I'm sorry, when asked if he was a musician, he would say, "I'm not a musician. I'm a tool maker. I make tools for musicians and they use my tools." That's his very, that kind of encapsulates how my dad thought. He's very clear, concise thinker, like a good engineer. And the part he left out there is that the musicians were really his beacon. He was once quoted as saying, in his work, it's not so much the music that he's interested in, but the opportunity to work with musicians. So he just loved the kind of expansive, creative nature of working with musicians, and who really is the epitome of that but Keith Emerson. So
Yeah.
he was just thrilled to see what Keith did with the Moog modular. And he was also kind of at Keith's uh um I don't want to say beck and call. I don't know what he was there to meet Keith's needs in any way he could. And we have photos of them together. Actually, the one you see behind me in 1973 at Rich Stadium in Buffalo, New York, where Dad came personally to make sure Keith's Moog Modular was in top shape for that huge, huge performance of that day. Also, Dad would tell a story about getting a call at 4 o'clock in the morning and picking it up. And it was Keith calling from Japan, where he was on tour because his ribbon controller wasn't working.
Oh,
And Dad had made that ribbon controller for him. And Dad had an idea of what was going on. So he said, get some rubbing alcohol, clean it off and let it dry. He said, I think what's happened is the salt from your sweat has built up and it's inhibiting the electronics from
Oh,
working.
wow. I would have
So
never thought of that.
yeah, so that Keith did that, and indeed it worked. So
How good.
yeah, they did.
Genius.
They had a very special relationship and just adored each other. For, you know, I wouldn't say that they got to see each other very often, but when they did, it was very, very warm, respectful, you know, full of admiration, mutual admiration. So a very, very special kind of intertwining of two gentlemen who had complementary talents and expertise, you know, but there was this crossover where Dad spoke a little bit of music and Keith understood kind of innately how the modular worked, and you know, more importantly, not how it worked, but more importantly, how he could take those sounds and integrate them into his music. Because remember, these were brand new sounds that people hadn't heard before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Sure.
to take up to 250,000 new sounds and say, you know what, I know exactly how I could use that to great effect is he was really had a very special talent.
Yes, I have to agree with you on that. Absolutely. And I'm sure a lot of people are going, yep, I totally agree. So tell me, now there is something called the Moog Foundation. And I'm really curious as to how that got started.
Well, that's a great question. The full name is the Bob Moog Foundation. And one thing that's important to clarify, and I just like to make this, you know, clear for people at the beginning, and is the reason, you know, we like to go by our full name is because we are often mistaken as a foundation that is part of Moog Music, which is not the case. Moog Music, of course, makes all the amazing synthesizers and theremins, and but the Bob Moog Foundation is completely separate. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're completely independent, and we were founded by Bob's family and colleagues. So so the way the Bob Moog Foundation came into being is certainly not from anything that Bob requested anywhere, because he was a very, very humble guy, and I'm not sure he would have ever imagined that something like this would have existed. In addition to the fact that there was absolutely no money for it. But what happened is he became sick in the summer of 2005. And in July of that year, my brother actually set up a page on the caringbridge.com, which is a page where terminally and critically ill people can put pages up there to make it easier for the patient and their family to communicate with their loved ones.
Mhm.
And it just kind of prevents people from maybe constantly texting and seeing how someone is doing, or constantly calling. You know, these are kind of things maybe you want to try and give the person who's ill a little space,
Sure.
while having this page really help facilitate communication that was comfortable for everybody. And on the caringbridge.com, the pages are pretty simple, and they're basically divided into a few sections. But one of the sections is a journal, and normally my stepmother Ileana would journal out every so often and update people on how my dad was doing. And then there was a guest book section where you could sign in and just send well wishes, or send, you know, tips about, I read, if you ate 2 cups of blueberries a day, it will help shrink your brain tumor, which is what he had. He had a glioblastoma multiforme, which is the most aggressive kind of brain tumor there is.
Ooh.
And the reason that my brother Matthew originally set up that page was because my dad wanted a way to keep in touch with 40 different people around the world. And so Matthew set up the page, he sent it out to the 40 people, and apparently one of the people didn't realize this was supposed to be confidential, because we're really trying to protect my dad's privacy. It was a very, very difficult time, as you might imagine. And one of the people didn't realize it was supposed to be kept confidential and posted the link on a synthesizer chat group.
Oh, oh,
And
my.
all of a sudden, we got 1,000 hits.
Oh,
And so my brother, being a little frustrated, immediately put up a password, sent the password out to the whole group and said, please do not share this. But then my dad kind of surprised us a couple of days later. He said, you know what? Just take the password down. Let him come. And we were really surprised that he said that, but that's what we did. And in the first 7 weeks, 60,000 people logged on to that web page. The day he died, 20,000 people logged on. And you have to remember, this is 2005, much earlier days of the internet.
sure.
So those numbers were quite remarkable. But in regards to this conversation, what was truly remarkable is in the guest book section. People did send their prayers, but a lot of people left testimonials about how Bob Moog had changed their lives, in some cases had transformed their lives. And we read things such as Bob Moog, because of Bob Moog, I'm a musician. Because of Bob Moog, I'm an engineer. Bob Moog gave me my creative voice. We read things like that over and over and over again. And that for us was really the wellspring of where the idea to even have a foundation came from. Because I think as a family, we knew basically what my father had accomplished, but he kept his career at arm's length from the family. So I don't think any of us truly understood the individual human impact. We knew he had won lots of awards. We knew he had 2 Grammys. We knew, how that his instruments had been used in music and revolutionized music. I don't think we realized how many lives all over the world he had changed. And we heard from people from 67 different countries.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I'm not
So
surprised. I'm just
that
not surprised at that.
that is when we decided, you know what? This is a legacy that not only deserves to be carried forward, but kind of demands to be carried forward. And not for Bob. Bob's gone. For future generations, so that they can continue to be inspired the way all of these people who wrote to us were inspired. So that was the whole genesis of the Bob Moog Foundation.
That's such a touching story. And what a way to start your father's legacy going forward, and that's exactly what it's all about. It's for the future musicians and the future engineers that come across the Moog and what that can bring for them and the creative impulses that causes. It's
Yes.
it's quite a remarkable idea that you came up with creating this foundation for everyone.
Well, I would we did take the initiative, it's true, but I would have to defer to something my father said. In the Moog documentary that's been out since 2004, and people can actually find it on YouTube. It's just
Oh,
called Moog.
okay.
The interviewer in that documentary asks him, "Where do you get your ideas?" And
Good
his
question.
answer was, "It would be egotistical of me to say my ideas were my own. I believe that there are a network of ideas," and he goes like this, "a network of ideas, and I open up my mind and those ideas come through me." And I really feel like the idea for the foundation was out there among all those thousands of people that wrote us, and it came to us and through us. So we really have those people to thank. And I always say that it really wasn't until I read all those testimonials on the Carrying Bridge that I was introduced to Bob Moog. I knew my dad, but I did not know Bob Moog. I learned about Bob Moog from those people.
Wow. Wow. Powerful.
It
Very,
really was.
very powerful. You know, it makes me want to ask what the mission statement is for the Bob Moog Foundation, excuse me.
Yeah, so kind of going from that, the mission of the Bob Moog Foundation is to carry on his legacy by inspiring people of all ages and all walks of life through the intersection of science, music, technology, and innovation. So it's essentially a mirror reflection of his work.
Very nice. Very well said. Very well said. I'm going to put my little specs on here. And now there is a autobiography out of your father.
There's a biography that came out about 6 months ago. I actually happen to have it right here. It's called Switched On, Bob Moog and the Synthesizer Revolution. It's by a author, musician, composer, and professor, Albert Glinsky. And some of your readers might recognize the name because he also wrote the biography of Leon Theremin.
Oh, wow.
That's one of the ways he and Bob got to know each other. Bob actually wrote the foreword for the Leon Theremin biography. So Albert dedicated 12 years of his life to creating this book. It's incredibly well researched, incredibly detailed. There are so many revelations in it. I have to tell you, I am going through it for a second time with a pencil and continue to learn so much. Not only of just singular facts, but being able to see them a little bit better and, forgive the expression, synthesize them in the whole spectrum of Bob Moog's life. And that's even from someone who kind of lived part of it with Bob Moog. There's still so much to learn. It's such a rich, complex legacy.
Yes.
So this biography, if people are interested, is available on the Bob Moog Foundation website. We have a little shop button in our navigation bar.
Okay.
And we offer just the plain biography. We offer biographies that have been signed by Albert, which you won't find anywhere else. We offer biographies that are signed by me. They are also, to be transparent, they're also available on Amazon. You just won't be supporting a tiny nonprofit that way. You'll be supporting somebody else, but that's okay.
Don't go through Amazon, please. Let's help the foundation.
And there's now an audiobook that just came out about a month ago as well.
Wow.
And people can find that on Audible, and forgive me, I forget where else, but I'm sure if people Google Bob Moog biography audiobook, they will find it.
Okay. Fabulous. I'm going to have to do that. I just love listening to books like that too. So I understand, Michelle, that you have something that you'd like to read from your father's book.
Yes, I thought that for this group in particular, it would be fitting to read from an excerpt that talks about Keith's early use of the Moog modular synthesizer.
Oh, yes, that would be incredibly awesome. do read. Okay,
so just to set the context here, we're talking about the winter of 1970 when this excerpt picks up.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Here we go. A week after Kingsley's concert, Keith Emerson debuted a Moog modular on stage in London with the Nice. Like many, Keith had discovered the instrument by accident. In a London music store, he'd heard Switched On Bach and was puzzled. He recognized the Bach Brandenburg Concerto No. 3 track because the Nice had featured it on an excerpt of their own, released the same month as Switched On Bach. But the Moog was a sound that he'd never heard before. He was intrigued, and he put his manager, Tony Stratton Smith, on the case to track down the device on Carlos's album. Stratton Smith located Mike Vickers, who owned one of the few Moogs in London at that time. Vickers invited Emerson to his apartment to have a go at it. Emerson was a talented pianist. Boy, that's an understatement.
Yes, it is.
and couldn't understand why the new beast of hardware, as he put it, could only play one note at a time. But yet, he remembered, the extraordinary sounds it made far outweighed its idiosyncrasies and imperfections. Keith asked if he could borrow it for an upcoming concert. Vickers was uneasy, warning that he couldn't predict how it would behave in live performance, because you have to remember, at that point, Moog modulars had rarely been used in live performance. They were more of a studio instrument.
Okay.
But he offered to stand by on stage to keep it in check. The more that Keith diddled around on Vickers' Moog, the more he saw it as his new playground. Having a ready spectrum of sound effects and tone colors under his fingers was central to his position in the band, because the Nice was unique in having a keyboardist stand in for the role of a lead guitarist.
Yeah.
He'd already tried every trick with speakers, amplifiers, and electric organ, jamming, rigging, and forcing these things to squeeze out new sonic colors with distortion. But nothing was reliable or easy to repeat. As the lead member of the group, he hogged the spotlight, ramping up the volume and the exhibitionism. His onstage antics were legendary.
They were.
He routinely abused his trademark Hammond organ in freakouts, manhandling it or stabbing it with his Hitler Youth dagger, to the horror of the Hammond people, who refused to service it. He recalled their disgust. They said, "Oh no, we're not touching your stuff anymore. You don't respect your instrument, so go someplace else and have it done." For the two back-to-back shows in February 7th at London's Royal Festival Hall, Mike Vickers loaned Keith his Moog. The 2,900-seat hall was packed. Keith commissioned a silver Lurex spacesuit to wear so he'd match the Moog and its space-age technology and flight deck layout, as he described it. For safety, Mike Vickers crouched behind the instrument the whole evening to make sure it kept working. He would jump out from time to time like a jack-in-the-box to change the array of patch cords, Keith remembered. He was there giving me the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and I could play. The New Music Express reported the Moog was introduced for the first time on the British stage during She Belongs to Me, the Bob Dylan song, which was followed by other covers and jazz rock variation of classical work, a hybrid style the band specialized in. Let's see, I'm just trying to... Not long after the Nice played with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, Keith announced he was breaking up the band. He felt it had run its course artistically, and he wanted to move on. Together with Greg Lake, the guitarist from the band King Crimson, and a 20-year-old drummer named Carl Palmer, from the group Atomic Rooster, he formed a new band, Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. Announced in the New Music Express on May 30th, this would be 1970, rehearsals to evolve a signature sound and build a stable of original songs began in June. For source material, Keith nudged the group towards the classical influences he'd used with the Nice. He'd assembled an epic suite based on pictures at an exhibition, and a driving instrumental adapted from a piece he played on the piano, Bela Bartok's Allegro Barbaro. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, ELP, booked London's Advision Studios in July to record their first album ahead of their planned live debut in August. Keith remembered spotting what I assumed to be the resident Moog synthesizer in the studio's anteroom. The instrument had sat there so long, everybody was afraid to touch it. Without Mike Vickers around, Keith Eddy offered, the session recording engineer, gamely set about trying to get some sounds out of it. I think if I stick this jack plug into the hole and this jack plug into this hole, we should be able to get some sort of noise, said Eddy. I tapped the keyboard hopefully and was rewarded with a rather bland tone. Tried to do the same patch again with the other oscillator, I suggested. Eddy complied and tapped on the keyboard again. This time it sounded a little more hopeful after fiddling with the oscillator's tuning. One oscillator left, we patched that the same way. ELP's first recorded use of the Moog was in Tank, an instrumental by Emerson and Palmer, with a long coda of Keith's Moog squealing out a jazzy manic solo over a driving vamp. Another song recorded in the early album sessions was the only other cut using the Moog. It would turn out to be one of the most memorable uses of the Moog modular ever. Yet it came together in a spontaneous, unplanned way. It happened when Keith arrived at the studio one afternoon and found Greg Lake strumming an unfamiliar folksy tune on an acoustic guitar, something that seemed out of character for the group's other songs. Lake called it just a bit of fun and asked Palmer to lay down some drum tracks underneath it. Lake confessed that he'd written the song on his first acoustic guitar when he was 12 years old. And when he tried to push it with King Crimson the year before, the band had rejected it. He called it a simplistic little medieval fantasy. Lucky Man was the story of a gentleman with white horses and ladies by the score who went to battle for honor and glory, was killed, and in the end, no money could save him. Ooh, what a lucky man he was, the chorus crooned. The tracks Lake and Palmer set down made a song of 3 minutes and 10 seconds, with a tacked-on outro of guitar strumming repeated harmony, ahs, and a drum fill. Everybody agreed the outro sounded a little barren, and that a synth solo might round out the mix. Keith was very happy to give it a sporting try, but he was still a greenhorn wandering his way around the modules. Keith puttered around on the Moog, quickly figuring out a few things he could try. The portamento knob seemed to be a load of fun during the level check, he recalled. You could slur notes. I made a mental note to use the effect when they ran the tape. There seemed to be a never-ending wealth of licks to be played over the simple modal outro. Keith got the signal and ran the first take. When I'd finished, he recalled, I looked up to see two happy faces in the control room. In Keith's offhand first try, he'd nailed something his bandmates were completely happy with. But Keith was completely unhappy. The oscillators were drifting out of tune, and he was just fooling around. He pleaded for another take, but the others decided it was a wrap. I was not convinced, he recalled. I thought it was the most mediocre solo I had ever played.
Wow.
Keith couldn't have guessed that his 1 minute and 25-second ad-lib, about to be engraved in the album's Grooves Forever, would become the gold standard for future synth solos and would wake pop listeners up to the synthesizer itself. Rather than blending into the mix, it flaunted everything a synthesizer was and an acoustic instrument wasn't.
Oh, what a fabulous read. Thank you so much. I got goosebumps. I just got complete goosebumps over that. I feel like you just took me right there. where I could be a shadow or a fly on the wall and just watch it all unfold. It's really something how Keith didn't like it, and yet the world loved it. Just amazing.
Yeah.
Just
I think that, something Keith may not have recognized is he was so talented
oh, wasn't he?
that even things that he may not have thought were, tapped into the best of his abilities
Mhm.
were somehow extraordinary in their own ways, like that solo.
They were.
And Bob recalls Keith sending him a reel-to-reel tape with the solo on it. And he remembers at that time listening to it and thinking, this is going to change everything.
Yeah.
I mean, he knew because he had not heard the Moog modular integrated in that way. Yes, the Monkees, the Doors, the Beatles. I'm leaving somebody out. Yes, they had all used it, but not as a solo, quite the solo instrument that Keith did. Yeah, not with the same kind of grasp that Keith did.
No. I mean, I loved the Monkees. I mean, I used to watch them on TV, and I had their albums and whatnot when I was growing up. But it was Keith's sound that changed my whole direction of music and got me out of the top 40 and into the prog rock. And I just never looked back. Sure, there are songs and whatnot that I still had listened to back in the day of top 40 that I liked, but I got into Genesis, Pink Floyd, yes, because of ELP. ELP was the very first band I ever heard that was on the progressive rock side that used the Moog. And I remember the first song I ever heard, which was Toccata. I was, of all songs to play, something like that. And I was just hearing a boop, boop. And I'm just going, what am I hearing? And I was very involved in music at the time when I was growing up. And my boyfriend said, well, what do you think? I didn't have an answer. I could not come up with an answer of what I thought because I couldn't get my mind to wrap around it. So I just told him, play more. So he played Carnival Line. And my life was forever changed. I said, you're not going home with that album.
That's so wonderful.
And I made him leave it with me so that I could listen to it. And I saved my babysitting money and went down. It was the very first album I ever bought was Brain Salad Surgery, and the rest is history. The rest is absolute history. So I'll tell you, that was a great read, Michelle. And we'll have to continue on with some other stuff too. Let's move on from here. Question.
Yes.
Where can somebody pick up a shirt like what I'm wearing here?
That is a great shirt. That's a great shirt.
Yes. Foundation right here.
Yes, and we have shirts like that and a bunch of other like really cool t-shirts that different graphic artists have designed for us that are, represent various aspects of the Moog legacy on the Bob Moog Foundation online store. So if you just go to moogfoundation.org, there's a navigation bar right at the top. There's a shop button. If you just click on the shop button, it will take you to the store. You can go to, there's a certain section just for apparel, or you can just put the t-shirts into the search bar and it'll pop up. But there's a lot of really great stuff there. And then of course, all the sales from the Bob Moog Foundation store go to benefit our work.
I love it. I love it. Everybody pick up a shirt like this one or one like it. And you will be helping out the Bob Moog Foundation and supporting them in their efforts to keep those therems and synthesizers going for everyone around the world. I love it. I love it, Michelle. That's great.
Yeah.
Now, there was something else. Now, I understand you've got some projects that you're working on currently, three major projects. You want to go over those with me?
Yeah, that would be great because those are really the three ways, the three main ways that we execute that mission that you and I just talked about.
Uh-huh.
The first one is an educational program called Dr. Bob Sound School,
Oh,
through which we teach little kids, second graders to be exact, about the science of sound through music and technology.
wow.
So we have created, this is not like a one-time thing where we go into a school for a day and do a cool assembly. I mean, that's great too. But what we've done is we've created a 10-week curriculum that meets state and national standards, that is highly experiential, multisensory, and we are teaching 3,000 little kids a year through that curriculum. And we are hoping to be able to expand that nationwide. We've had one little piece we've needed to be able to expand to scale nationwide. And we've just concluded 2 prototypes for a custom educational tool that we'll be using. So I am hopeful that by the end of 2023, we will be able to begin branching out outside of Western North Carolina, which we're very anxious to do. So the goal with Dr. Bob Sound School is not only to teach kids about the science of sound, but also to get them interested in science in general, because the United States has lagged so far behind in science, and it causes issues now with how competitive we are on the world stage, if you will, and it will continue to cause those same kind of issues if we don't catch up. So we are doing our part to create future scientists, but we're also um, engaging kids in the process of discovery, in creative thinking. We encourage them to think outside the box. They all have science notebooks where they practice the scientific methodology, which is to have an idea, write it down, test it, and write down the results. And they actually get an example of Bob Moog schematic notebooks where he did just that. And then they do the same thing with each of our 10 activities.
Wow.
So, and we always say to them, write down all your ideas. All of your ideas are important.
Yes.
So we are getting them to be more creative thinkers in the hopes of helping them become tomorrow's problem solvers, essentially.
I love it. I think that is just such a great way to inspire kids of that age. I mean, second graders, they're what, 8 years old on the
That
average?
7 and 8, yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
their minds are very open, and they get
sure.
engaged very quickly. And so then the other project, because I know we're going to start running low on time, but
Yes, we
the
are.
the
Starting
other
early.
the other project is the protection and preservation of the Bob Moog Foundation archives, which is a collection of over 10,000 pieces of material ranging from photo schematics, of desktop notebooks, correspondence, to instruments, prototypes, vintage catalogs, uh, et cetera, et cetera. Yes. And so we protect and preserve this huge collection to be able to share with researchers, journalists, to be able to share on our website, and to also share with museums, which leads into our third project, which is where our educational efforts and our archive preservation efforts converge. And that is in our fairly new Moog-Museum, located in downtown Asheville, North Carolina, opened in May of 2019. The Moog-Museum is a museum that brings Bob's legacy to life, and for the purpose of inspiring people to engage with the history of electronic music, engage with creativity, the story of American invention, and to hopefully inspire them to be more creative in their own lives. So I am really proud to say that the Moog-Museum, which is a fairly small facility, it's about 1,400 square feet, but packed with about $500,000 of really innovative exhibits, um, has welcomed almost 30,000 people since
Wow.
it's been open, even with being closed for 5 months during COVID and 2 months for construction a little bit later, because we did expand just a tiny bit.
Mhm.
So it is a well-loved cultural resource, for people in Asheville and way beyond. We get people from all over the country and all over the world.
I
So
can imagine. I can
those
imagine.
those are the three ways that we are working very hard to bring this legacy alive.
I know that I would just love to visit that museum. I mean, I just admire your father's work so much. And I was introduced to it myself through ELP, through Keith's music, and a little bit of Carl's too with Toccata. He had that synthesizer and the drums. So,
Yes.
I was just, it was a sound that I never heard before, never heard since like it. And I have to say, I was instantly hooked on it and had to hear more and had to understand what I was hearing. Never quite understood fully what I was hearing to this day, because it's a sound that is just so different from anything else out there. And I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with just accepting what I'm hearing and enjoying it.
Well, that is really what it's meant for. So,
Good. That's great. Is there anything, Michelle, that you'd like to talk over as well?
well, I would just say, reiterate that we are a small nonprofit organization. There is a team of 6 of us executing all of this work, including running a museum, which is open 7 days a week. So
Wonderful.
two of us are dedicated to that, and the other 4 are dedicated to everything else that needs to happen, including supporting the people at the Museum. We do aspire to grow our organization, not only to expand our projects, but to become truly sustainable, so that the organization can live on, for decades and generations. This is really important work and a really very important foundation that we hope we are laying for many, many people that will come after us. And I will say that I just turned 55 last Friday. I've been at this job for more or less 18 years. And by the time I'm 60, the foundation needs to be in a place where it can go on without me. I'm not sure what I will do then. I may stay, or I may hand it off to somebody else. But we really want the Bob Moog Foundation to be strong and growing and sustainable. So if your listeners want to support that,
Yes.
they can donate through our website.
Okay.
Again, moogfoundation.org. There's a donate button as soon as you log on. Also, again, purchasing things from our online store helps. The Museum has a Reverb store where people can go buy things, and all the proceeds comes to us. If any of your listeners are musicians and they use Spectrasonics products, there's a product, Spectrasonics, made especially for us, called the Bob Moog Tribute Library, that all the funding comes to us. There are lots of ways to support the Bob Moog Foundation. And I would just ask if people please support the Bob Moog Foundation. Help us keep us strong and growing and sustainable for decades to come.
Absolutely. Michelle, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me and with all of our members here that are going to be just excited to listen to what you have to say. I know I've learned so much from you just in our time that we've spent together, and I just can't wait to get out to that museum and see that. And I'm just excited. It's just fabulous information, and do check her website, and do yourself and do the Bob Moog Foundation, excuse me. That you got to make sure you get the last name pronounced correctly.
Rhymes with Vogue.
Moog,
Moog.
not
Yes.
Moog, not May. It's
Right.
Moog.
Moog.
And at any rate, I want to thank you again, Michelle, so much. Do appreciate your time, and take care. And God bless.
You are welcome. It's my honor, and it's my honor especially to be here and be able to talk a little bit about Keith. He was a dear friend of mine as well.
He's a dear friend to so many of us.
Yes.
Take care.